Hey everybody, the session that I'm going to be talking about right now is called Family Affairs, Genetics and Rheumatic Disease. The main speaker is Shelby Brooks. She is a pediatric rheumatology nurse practitioner. And the other speakers are Rob Wickall, who was the speaker for the NBA mascot session, and his son, Everest, who is a person living with enthesitis-related juvenile idiopathic arthritis, and talking about basically how common it is for familial relationships to be able to develop very similar diseases. And Rob, he has ankylosing spondylitis, and his son has enthesitis related juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And how likely is your son or your daughter to develop a rheumatologic disease or an AiArthritis disease? And how, if your parents have, one of your parents have an AiArthritis disease, how likely are you and your siblings to develop those things? She goes into that. The first part of the session has to do with the nitty-gritty of genetics, talking about how genetics is a very young field. The first human genome sequence was reported in 2001, pretty new, 24 years old. He states that a gene is a segment of DNA that carries information about certain traits. Humans contain almost 30 to 40 trillion cells, and each nucleus of these cells contains 23 pairs of chromosomes. 46 pairs of chromosomes, 23 from mom, 23 from dad. And these 23 pairs make up a copy of a human genome, the entire set of DNA found in each cell. And each chromosome is made up of 2 DNA molecules, and there's 44,000 genes across the human genome. Genetics is a study of how genotypes affect phenotypes. And genotypes are basically, have you ever seen a Punnett square when you're in high school? It's like the big letter, that's homozygous dominant, big letter, small letter is heterozygous, and small letter is homozygous recessive. Actually, let me show you my screen so that you can see. And so going back to high school science, the genotype is the genetic variation or what's inside the Punnett square, and the phenotype is the heritable trait that is connected with it. If you remember back in high school biology, we talked about the phenotype or the heritable trait being a widow's peak, or if you can do a certain thing with your tongue and things like that. That's basically the breakdown of what those are. And heritability is basically how those are passed down from parent to child. She talks a little bit about gene mutations and the different kinds of gene mutations. Based on a study completed in 2011 and published in 2012, it is predicted that the average individual has more than 400 damaging variants and more than 2 disease-causing variants. So that means that almost everybody has the chance to develop or has gene mutations that can develop into different disorders, diseases, and things like that. And so she goes into now more of how does this relate to rheumatology? And basically, there's no single gene factor that causes disease development. Rather, there are many genes that impact susceptibility to disease development, disease presentation, and response to treatment. So basically, there is not one single gene that will say, yes, you have this disease, but rather there's a group of them that will then show the susceptibility to disease development. So there are 2 types of conditions in rheumatology: monogenic conditions, in which genetic mutations are causative, or basically that these genetic mutations directly relate to the disease happening. And there's polygenic conditions, aka genetically complex, in which genetic mutations influence the susceptibility of someone developing that disease and often interact with environmental factors like the air that you are breathing, the water that you consume, the environment that you live in, how stressful it might be, things like that. I'm going to share my screen again for these so you can see the different monogenic and polygenic rheumatic diseases. So there's a list on here just to highlight a few. Familial Mediterranean fever is an AiArthritis disease. CAPS is an AiArthritis disease, but it is now called NLRP3, associated autoinflammatory diseases, which include familial cold, autoinflammatory syndrome, Muckle-Wells syndrome, and there's also monogenic SLE or monogenic lupus. Yeah, I wonder if a lot of us who have lupus, if we know if it's monogenic or if it's polygenic, because I have no idea. Polygenic rheumatic diseases, familial JIA and SLE. It also leads into RA. And there's also the HLA-B27 associated disorders, which are also classified under spondyloarthropathies, and that's enthesitis-related JIA, juvenile psoriatic arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease-related arthritis, reactive arthritis, juvenile Behçet's disease, and a few of those all fall under AiArthritis diseases too. And Ankylosing spondylitis and HLA-B27 disease, HLA-B27G. It says about 10% of healthy Caucasians are HLA-B27 positive. Only about 10% of those people will develop AS, and 80 and 90% of people diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis carry this gene. Juvenile ankylosing spondylitis is polygenic and is not causative. It makes you more susceptible. So having the HLA-B27 is having you be more susceptible. If you have AS and are HLA-B27 positive, there is a 50% chance that offspring will also be HLA-B27 positive. Oops. And remember, this gene, it is associated with a group of diseases. It's not necessarily going to be the exact same disease, and will have the HLA positive gene, but only 5 to 10% of those HLA-B27 positive children will go on to develop the actual disease. And basically making sure to monitor patients with HLA-B27 for other HLA-B27 disorders. If you do have ankylosing spondylitis, might want to look out for IBD or psoriasis or anterior uveitis. Those are all comorbidities or conditions that fall under our disease umbrella. And it's right here, you can see all of the different arthritis diseases that fall under this umbrella, and advise patients or parents to monitor for siblings who may have similar symptoms leading to these disorders. Really considering genetic testing before having kids to see if you are positive in these genes, so you know what to prepare for. Consider genetic evaluation and counseling for patients with monogenic disorders. And is genetic testing really needed? Identifying the need, choosing correct panel, pitfalls, variations of unknown significance, and variations in DNA with uncertain impact of health may contribute to patient and family anxiety and or confusion. I think that's really what it is sometimes, not even just for rheumatology, but for cancer genes or anything like that. It may put the family at ease, or it may cause more anxiety and confusion. And so I think that this has been a very interesting session. I think a lot of also what she talks about is being able to see, hopefully in the future, if we're able to use this information for treat to target. There are some pathways that are being studied that we will be able to see, especially for JAK inhibitors and TNF inhibitors. There's a lot more for us to figure out in this world of genetics, but I think that just knowing the basics of how the diseases can be passed on from generation to generation is important, just to be prepared and to also know that this is a possibility that can happen to your children. That is the session, and I hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you, and have a great day.